I feel the NBA is a bit hypocritical here in taking this higher moral stance because the league has fully embraced gambling. You cannot attend or watch an NBA game without being bombarded with messages promoting all the ways you can place bets on the game. So I ask you, which is more broadly harmful to our society, strippers or gambling? Hello again. Welcome to The Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, I share opinions, thoughts, truths on a wide variety of topics based on what I believe to be a unique life experience. And you can read more about that in the notes or the profile. My intent is to share stories and experiences and hopefully provide some life and career lessons that will help you on your life journey. Please follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5, subscribe to the YouTube channel Ruthless Truth, and there's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. General format, I'll share some initial commentary on current news or just some thoughts. Then I'll pick one topic and go a little deeper, which will be today's truth. And then I like to finish with an American history fun fact. Okay, lots to talk about this week. However, what I will not discuss today is the war in Iran. And for a couple of reasons. One, there's already 24/7 wall-to-wall coverage, and I don't know how much more I can add to the discussion. And second, I'm just weary of the topic. But I will make one observation. It does not appear there was a well thought out plan, assuming there was a plan at all, when the decision was made to attack Iran. I guess we'll all just be surprised together. Okay, so what else is going on? Well, for me, as a very frequent traveler, the partial government shutdown is major news, although not covered very extensively. The Department of Homeland Security, which oversees the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, has largely been shut down since February 14th, when federal funding lapsed without a new appropriation from Congress. As such, the TSA agents only received a partial paycheck on February 28th, and this week will receive no paycheck at all for March 13th. Now, most of these agents can't afford to miss a check, so they're taking side jobs and not reporting to work. This has led to airport security wait times of several hours in some major airports, especially with this being a spring break week in many parts of the United States. So, what's the reason for the shutdown? Well, again, it's our tone-deaf, do-nothing Congress. And what's the issue? Well, Democrats are blocking passage until they see tighter controls put in place for ICE. Republicans want full funding for the DHS without any new restrictions on ICE. Well, you're probably thinking, well, surely the parties are getting together to hammer out a compromise, given the adverse impacts on the traveling consumers. No. The House of Representatives is out all week, with the Republicans in Florida for their annual retreat. Now, the Senate is in Washington, but they're working on a housing bill. Now, of course, the House and Senate members never miss a paycheck during a shutdown, so they don't feel the pain their constituents are feeling. It looks like I will be saying this every week until we get to November. Let's vote them all out and elect a new body that is focused on improving the lives of everyday Americans. All right, another recent news item. This week, the Atlanta Hawks of the NBA announced that they were canceling, as previously announced, Magic City Night, which was scheduled for March 16th versus the Orlando Magic. So, for those who don't know, Magic City is Atlanta's most well-known strip club, although the promotional materials simply refer to it as a iconic cultural institution. And there were no plans to have any dancers present at the game, and many fans were eagerly anticipating the event. However, not everyone was excited about the prospect of the NBA celebrating a gentleman's club. In fact, some veteran players voiced their disapproval, most notably Luke Cornett of the San Antonio Spurs, who posted a lengthy blog in which, among many comments, he stated the promotion would, quote, reflect poorly on the NBA, specifically in being complicit in the potential objectification and mistreatment of women in our society. Now, Cornette was in the minority opinion among NBA players, and he received some pushback from not only players, but some in the NBA media. And just on a personal note, as hard as it may be to believe, I never actually have been to Magic City, despite having lived in Atlanta 5 different times over the course of 40 years. And it's not because of any moral grounds. I have absolutely no problem with strip clubs. And as noted in a previous episode of Ruthless Truth, I have attended gentlemen's clubs in other cities. But I had no problem whatsoever in the Hawks promotion and partnership with Magic City. But alas, the NBA stepped in and directed the Hawks to cancel the promotion, although the league had initially approved it. In a statement, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said, quote, while we appreciate the team's perspective and their desire to move forward, we have heard significant concerns from a broad array of league stakeholders, including fans, partners, and employees. I believe canceling this promotion is the right decision for the broader NBA community. Okay, now, I'm really not at all surprised by this decision, and I understand it. The NBA envisions itself as a family-friendly brand, so I get it. But that said, I feel the NBA is a bit hypocritical here in taking this higher moral stance because the league has fully embraced gambling. You cannot attend or watch an NBA game without being bombarded with messages promoting all the ways you can place bets on the game. So I ask you, which is more broadly harmful to our society, strippers or gambling? Well, we know that gambling addiction is a real problem, affecting 5 to 8 million people in the United States alone. Gambling addiction costs the U.S. roughly $6 billion annually. It's associated with high rates of suicide, mental illness, and has led to point shaving and illegal gambling among college and professional athletes. So to me, gambling is far worse than strip clubs. But as I often say, if you ever wonder about the reason behind any business decision in this country, the answer is almost always money. The most recent data indicates the NBA generates over $160 million per season in gambling revenue. I guess that helps them get comfortable with any potential moral or branding issues with betting behavior. Okay, final point. The 98th Academy Awards take place this weekend with the movie Sinners receiving a record 16 nominations. Many fans, and especially Black people, are excited for the positive attention and recognition for the movie. I've seen it a couple of times and thoroughly enjoyed it. I just caution folks to dial down their enthusiasm because I hate to see you disappointed. A couple of reminders for you. First, historically, the Academy has rarely embraced the horror film genre. And secondly, in 1985, The Color Purple received 11 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, but didn't win a single award. I expect that Sinners can improve on that, but we'll see. Enjoy the show. Okay, let's get to today's truth. Today's truth. As you know, the United States is currently at war with Iran. And when making the case, the president has said on many occasions that Iran has been, quote, killing Americans for 47 years. Okay, 47 years ago was 1979. That's more than 2 generations of Americans who have only known Iran as an enemy. But why? What happened in 1979? And why does a country literally half a world away hate the United States so much? Well, in today's truth, I will cover recent modern history and explain how Iran went from a close American ally to a sworn blood enemy of the United States. All right, first, although Iran, formerly known as Persia, has been around since the 7th century BC, I'll begin this story in 1951. In 1951, Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the Iranian oil industry, which to that point had been owned and managed by the British. The Iranian people and parliament felt too much of their oil riches were being exported out to the West. So following the nationalization, the British oil companies were expelled from the country. Well, that didn't fit very well with the British, who, supported by the U.S., boycotted Iranian oil, all but eliminating exports. Then, just 2 years later, in 1953, the intelligence agencies of the U.S., which is the CIA, and the British, MI6, executed a successful coup and ousted Mossadegh from office. Afterwards, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi assumed leadership as king, or Shah of Iran. And backed by the West, the Shah welcomed the return of the British, who, with the Americans, took a foothold of the Iranian oil market. All right, so for the next 26 years, Iran was ruled as an autocracy by the Shah, who had strong support from the United States. And in subsequent decades, per capita income for Iranians greatly increased, and petroleum export revenue fueled an enormous increase in state funding for industrial development projects, economic growth, rapid urbanization, the spread of literacy, and deconstruction of Iran's feudalist customs. They even provided women the right to vote for the first time. With the enormous inflow of wealth from the oil, Iran was quickly modernized, and this became known as the White Revolution. Okay, also during this time, Iran was very tolerant of Jews living in the country, and many Iranian citizens, especially students, resided in the United States and had a positive and welcoming attitude toward America and Americans. From 1950 to 1979, an estimated 800,000 to 850,000 Americans had visited or lived in Iran and had often expressed their admiration for the Iranian people. So where did it all go wrong? What happened to shift the sentiment from pro-US to the violent and hateful rhetoric we hear today? Well, not all Iranians were on board with this rapid transformation of the nation's culture. Specifically, many in the Islamic clergy were concerned about the erosion of their own power, and they saw the westernization of Iran as an attack on Islam. The most vocal leader of the opposition was Ruhollah Khomeini. He denounced the Shah and the United States and sought to organize an opposing movement. Well, the Shah quickly addressed the threat and exiled Khomeini. Then, the Shah implemented martial law to control any future opposition. Now, the Shah developed close relationships with President Richard Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, although not so much with President Gerald Ford. The Shah also lived in an increasingly lavish and opulent lifestyle, and with his close ties to the West, especially the United States, the Shah became increasingly unpopular in his native country. Protests against the Shah grew to include more than 10% of the country. Now, this is rare for revolutions to involve even 1% of a country's population. So this was quite a revolt. Frustration with the Shah was so great that even secular and leftist groups supported Ayatollah Khomeini, despite sharing none of his political positions. Well, a series of events culminated in the overthrow of Pahlavi dynasty and the ouster of the Shah. This is known as the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Well, from here, things changed immediately and dramatically in Iran. In March 1979, a referendum was held on whether to transition from a government of monarchy to an Islamic republic. The referendum was approved by a massive margin of 99%. And having returned from exile, Ayatollah Khomeini was named supreme leader. Iran's modernizing capitalist economy was quickly replaced by populist Islamic economic and cultural policies. Industries were nationalized, laws and schools Islamized, and Western influence was restricted. Then, in November, still 1979, Iranian students stormed the U.S. embassy in Tehran and took dozens of Americans as hostages and held them for more than a year. Interestingly, after initially taking the hostages, the Ayatollah Khomeini called for the release of all the black and women hostages, which totaled 13 Americans. The reason given was that these groups were already marginalized in America and held oppressed status. Now, the West viewed this move as propaganda intended to depict Iran as some defender of the oppressed. But the remaining 52 hostages would be held for 444 days. And by December of 1979, death to America was a common Iranian chant and rallying cry. Well, following the taking of the hostages, Iran overnight became a hated enemy of America, and the United States implemented economic sanctions banning all exports from Iran, including oil. Then, in 1980, viewing Iran as a weak threat that could easily be conquered, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein ordered an invasion of Iran. And while Iraq expected a quick and decisive victory, the war lasted 8 years. Over 500,000 people were killed. And though officially neutral, the United States secretly backed Iraq, providing financial aid, weapons, and intelligence. And of course, Iran became aware of this. Also, on July 3rd, 1988, less than 10 years after the Iranian Revolution, the U.S. shot down an Iranian civil airplane, saying it was mistaken for an Iranian fighter jet. All 290 people on board were killed. Now, all of these events in a short period of time fostered and increased the hate and contempt Iranians held for the United States. But there was one more additional factor. The United States continued to be a close ally of Israel, which in 1979, Iran denied Israel's right to even exist. Iran-U.S. relations remained hostile for many more years. However, after nearly a decade of negotiation, in 2015, Iran signed a deal with the U.S., agreeing to limit its nuclear development program. In exchange, the U.S. and its allies lifted economic sanctions, allowing Iran to sell its oil internationally for the first time in decades. But in 2018, in his first term, President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the deal and re-implemented sanctions on the already fragile Iranian economy, which only worsened. Since then, hostilities and rhetoric only escalated, bringing us to today. So, now I hope you have a better understanding of the nearly 50 years of hostility between Iran and the United States. Obviously, it's not going to get better anytime soon. And while I have no idea when and how the current military conflict will end, I seriously doubt I will live long enough to see positive relations between the United States and Iran. Okay, let's get to today's American history fun fact. Today's American history fun fact. You know, how often do we hear about someone who develops some incredible invention only to have someone else either steal or acquire the idea and make it into something much better, leaving the original inventor with little to nothing? You know, a couple of the most famous examples include Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who created the iconic Superman comic, but they sold their rights to DC Comics for just $130. This was in 1939, and they never received any royalties from Superman merchandise, films, movies, and everything since. And then there was Nikola Tesla, who was persuaded to sign all of his royalty rights to George Westinghouse. Well, in today's American history fun fact, I'm going to tell the story of the man who invented Coca Cola, but didn't get much credit and nearly any money. John Stith Pemberton was born July 8, 1831 in Knoxville, Georgia, but mostly grew up in Rome, Georgia. In 1850, at age 19, he graduated with his medical license from Reformed Medical College of Georgia in Macon, Georgia. He initially practiced medicine and surgery, but eventually opened a drugstore in Columbus. Pemberton served in the Georgia State Guard during the American Civil War, and in April 1865, he sustained a wound to his chest during the Battle of Columbus. Now, he was treated for his pain and soon became addicted to the morphine he received. So Pemberton began seeking morphine-free alternatives to treat his pain. His first recipe was called Dr. Tuggle's compound syrup of globe flour, but the active ingredient was toxic. So then he began experimenting with coca and coca wines, eventually creating a recipe which he called Pemberton's French Wine Coca. Now, during these times, there was much concern about alcoholism, dependency, and depression among Civil War veterans. Pemberton's, quote, medicine was advertised as particularly beneficial for, quote, ladies and all those whose sedentary employment causes nervous prostration, which means extreme exhaustion. But in 1886, Atlanta and Fulton County enacted temperance legislation. This meant Pemberton had to develop a non-alcoholic alternative to his fine wine coca, which included coca leaves and cola nuts as sources of its ingredients. Pemberton blended the base syrup with carbonated water, actually by accident when he was trying to make another glass of the beverage. Pemberton decided then to sell this as a fountain drink rather than a medicine. Dr. Pemberton produced the syrup for his new beverage and carried a jug of the product down the street to Jacob's Pharmacy, where it was sampled, pronounced excellent, and placed on sale for 5 cents a glass as a soda fountain drink. Also at that time, Pemberton launched the Pemberton Chemical Company, which was owned by John Pemberton and 3 business partners, one of which was Frank Mason Robinson, who also served as his bookkeeper. Now, not only did Mason come up with the name Coca-Cola, but he was also responsible for writing the Coca-Cola name in Spencerian script, which was popular with bookkeepers of the era and remains to this day one of the most recognized trademarks in the world. Pemberton made many health claims for his product, touting it as a valuable brain tonic that would cure headaches, relieve exhaustion, calm nerves, and marketed as delicious, refreshing, pure joy, exhilarating, and invigorating. Unfortunately, soon after the launch of Coca-Cola, Pemberton fell ill. He was nearly broke and desperate, so he began selling off pieces of his rights to the formula. Now, while he believed that his formula and beverage would be successful and one day achieve national prominence, he was also still heavily addicted to morphine, which drove him to make deals to get immediate funds. You know, drug addicts make bad money decisions. Still, he wanted to maintain some ownership shares, for his son Charles. But his son had no vision or long-term view. He just wanted money immediately. So in 1888, John Pemberton sold his remaining patent ownership to fellow pharmacist Asa Griggs Chandler for the total price of $239, which in today's dollars would equate to about $8,500. John Pemberton died later that year of stomach cancer on August 16th, 1888. Now, his son continued to try to sell, what few shares of the formula that he held, but Charles Pemberton died 6 years later from an opium overdose. And Asa Griggs Chandler, the pharmacist who now owned the Pemberton formula, well, in 1892, he founded the Coca Cola Company along with 3 partners, including Frank Robinson. Robinson served as secretary and treasurer, as well as his previous responsibility for advertising. The following year, Chandler trademarked the brand and distributed the first dividends to the company shareholders. By 1895, the company was distributing Coca Cola nationwide in the United States. It became the world's best-selling soft drink. Frank Mason continued to promote the brand with innovative advertising until retiring in 1914. And Asa Chandler became ridiculously wealthy, even later becoming the mayor of Atlanta. This is just another example of the sometimes brutal world of business and commerce. John Pemberton invented Coca-Cola, but neither he nor his progeny ever financially benefited from his effort and ingenuity. Okay, that's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Thank you so much for listening. Again, please follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ruthless Truth. And there's also the Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. Thanks again, and I will talk to you soon.